Whenever you rent or buy a video, you need to be sure that the film you choose is suitable for the audience at home.
Do sit down. We're just about to have some tea.
Ladies and gentlemen, please do not panic, but scream! Scream for your lives!
Hey weirdos, the kettle's boiled. Welcome to Tea for Terror, where we take a favourite horror film and dissect it over a nice cup of tea. I'm your host, Andrew Graves, and my guest today is here to tell us that he needs this podcast like a leper needs a three-way mirror. Welcome once again to James Whittington. How are you doing, my old fella?
That's the best introduction yet, that one, Andrew. Yeah, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm all right. I was trying to, because obviously when I do these intros, I go through the film quotes and I try and pick something and sort of play with it. It was really difficult to do with the film we're looking at today because it's all about female sexual body parts. So it's like, it's not going to work. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
So
it's all about the assets.
It is, yeah. Yeah, so are you well?
Yeah, really well. NYX is doing incredibly well at the moment on channel Freeview 289 and Channel Box and all that. Mainly, I think a lot of the times because of the new content in our first original programming. Alan Jones from Fright Fest fame, as many people know him now. He's got his own Saturday Scares going on at the moment, so he's choosing films out of the NYX catalogue and having an introduction, and very similar to a certain host we'll be talking about later on. Obviously, he's more glamorous, and so we've been having some nice Giallo titles, even a classic like 13 Ghosts he introduced. We've also got Canadian creative Chris Alexander doing Sinister Cinema on a Monday, and he's going through the best Canadian films the moment, so expect Soska Sisters and things like that in Cronenberg, obviously. And that original program's really getting the viewers. People are really buying into that, so we're looking to do more with lots of different people.
Yeah, it's looking good. I mean, keep seeing stuff popping up on Facebook and social media and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it is like one of those little things that it kind of shouldn't exist now, but it does. You know what I mean? It's you know, like I said, yeah, because obviously the film we're going to be talking about later on, I think this is, if anything still exists in that vein, it is something like NYX. I mean, it's a different beast, but it's got that similar vibe to it as well, because I think that's for any sort of horror fan or anybody that's into sort of cool or stranger sort of darker material. I think it's a perfect outlet for that, really. And you know, as well as these other little things that are there, you know, you got Scream magazine and the Dark Side and all these little things that, you know, probably a lot of mainstream folks aren't aware of, but for us and for people that are aware of them, it's, you know, it's good times.
Yeah, we're really lucky, and I think they've picked a great time, you know, for such a thing, you know, and it's like a great preview for those, because we're obviously being free to air. And we've shown some quite like House at the Edge of the Park and stuff like that. It's a good try before you go and buy the 4K. Just, you know, heavy investment. And I think that helps support physical media. So you can't replace it. I love physical media stuff. It doesn't matter how many on-demand channels you have, that the film you want will never be there. You know, so I think it's great, because I'd never seen House at the Edge of the Park before, and I watched it on the channel to write about it, and I had to get the 4K from 88 Films, because it's just brilliant, you know. It is a nasty little film, but it's got a lot of merit to it as well. So I think it's a good try before you buy.
Yeah, I think that even if I sneakily watch something on YouTube or whatever occasionally, because I just sometimes I just have to do it for speed, because if I'm talking about the Broadway, I've got to rewatch it and I don't have time to buy it. I'll watch it on YouTube. But if it's something that I revisit and think, oh yeah, I will go out and buy it. You know, I am that person. I'm not just a pirate guy. I will go out and buy it. I'm surrounded by physical media. You know, I had to rewatch The Naked Kiss the other day, the Sam Fuller film, and I was just watching it again, thinking, God, this is, and immediately as soon as I stopped watching it, I like went on Criterion and ordered it, you know, because it's just absolutely stunning. It's brilliant. And there's nothing like it, that getting that post and getting your box set.
Yeah.
It's just, you know.
I've still got my old Laserdisc playing. I've still got the uncut Cannibal Holocaust and that for it. I wouldn't part with it because
I
it's
can't,
such a,
I
you
can't
know,
watch that film. I just refuse to
oh,
watch that film now. Can't do it.
even the Laserdisc's colored red. It's just classics like that.
It's a
But I
shame
love,
because
I love that sort of thing.
parts of it, it's brilliantly directed, it's in some ways, but it's just too.
The animal cruelty's too much, but
You don't need it, It's just what was the point in that? Like I said, it's like one of those strange things that you tend to get with those Italian. I love Italian cult horror films, but it's um yeah, the nastier they are, the nicer the soundtrack is. Soundtrack for Cannibal Holocaust is beautiful. It should
yeah,
be.
no, no,
It
no,
should
it
be
is a
just be the
trip.
sound of someone banging their head against a table, but it's actually very melodic. It's wonderful. Yeah. So, yeah, I think what I wanted to do, right, because obviously you've been on, this is your third time you've been on, James. So
Yeah,
I keep locking him in the cellar, but he keeps escaping.
yeah.
Um, so he's here again. No, but you've been on three times. So obviously when guests come on for the first time, what I'll ask them is their early connections with horror, how they got involved with horror, where they came. Obviously, I'm not going to do that again. And then you came on
Mhm,
again. Um, we talked about Black Christmas for our Christmas episode, and so we talked about the links between horror and Christmas.
mhm.
But I thought, given the film we're going to be looking at today, because it does fit a very key time in terms of horror and what was happening, particularly with American horror at that time. So I thought we'd kind of, start off with a bit of a conversation about that very specific point in time. I'm talking about 80s horror films because I remember, I don't know if, I don't know if it's the same. I'm sure it's probably a similar thing with yourself, but obviously I went through that whole thing of being a kid in this young kid in the 70s. And by 1980, I would turn 10. And so you're going into the 80s. By the time you're 12, 13, you're starting to get more exposed to not just kind of your horror films that are appearing on telly, but that's when, for the first time, I remember the first VHS I ever saw was American Werewolf in London,
Mhm.
and getting exposed to all this kind of stuff. But also a little bit later on, when video had kind of moved beyond just your dodgy corner shop guy, when you were getting your blockbusters and things like that, or your bigger sort of more prestige um places. I remember it's just me and my mate on a Friday or whatever, would just go in and have a look what was there. In fact, um other than sort of Blockbuster, there was another place. I grew up in a little town called Sutton, like my ex-mining town, and there was a place like a little corner, like a little not a corner, but a little shop, and it was called Venus Videos. So they did all the sort of more of your mainstream videos. Then upstairs, they had the horror cavern, which was me, that was just me. It was just obviously it was just decorated. You got all the posters. It was really dark, and it was all everything, all the stuff that you shouldn't have been exposed to. I was exposed to, and so we used to go in there every Friday night or whatever, and we'd rifle through that. And we just you just go you'd lit because you've got no internet, anything like that.
Mhm.
You were going purely on the covers. And
Mhm.
so, and we watched some absolute shit. We watched some brilliant stuff as well. But the thing is, at that point, at that age, I didn't even drink then, but it's like, at that age, 16, 17, you get your popcorn or your pop or whatever, take it home, get your video, stick bloody chopping mall in or whatever it was, and go. And that was it. That was your Friday night. And
Mhm.
it didn't care. It could be the best horror film you've ever seen or the fucking worst horror film you've ever seen. It didn't
Mhm.
matter. I can still smell the insides of that shop. I can still picture me and my mate sitting there. It just felt like I'm not one of those people who is stuck in the 80s. I'm not gonna say, oh, it's nowhere near as good now as it was then. There are some amazing stuff now and some brilliant
Hmm.
films. I'm not going to say that, but because I was 16, 17 around that sort of key time, around the time when this film we're going to talk about was coming out, it just felt like a bit of a magic time for me. It just felt, it's
Hmm.
lots of stuff going on, and we had no idea how the future was going to pan out. And even though the
Hmm.
80s was pretty grim as well in some ways,
Hmm.
there was, for a kid or someone, a teenager, it was
Hmm.
just kind of a nice, a weird sort of place to be, but an interesting one.
Yeah, exactly. No, I remember that sort of thing because one of the last, because you used to be able to buy X rental tapes from our local, I can't even remember what it's called now, and that's where I got Evil Dead 2 from and things like that, which I still have. The old Max Headroom show when it was Matt Frew was like this action hero instead of just being, at Max's head, and that was great. Stuff you can't buy still anymore like that. And I remember that just going in and, oh yeah, that box, I want to see that, and it was just feeding a need. You wanted to see new stuff. Three or four channels on the TV. Sky was just coming in, and it just fed that need. And I think that's where the obsession for horror, because you want to see what's next, or that director did, or what continued that franchise, no matter how bad it was, you still wanted to see the next one. Like Witchboard, God, how many entries is into that now? Or even today, Hellraiser, they keep churning those ones out every now and again.
Yeah, and I mean, I mean the cinema as well. I mean, during the 80s, lived in Sutton, so the nearest cinema I had was in Mansfield, so the ABC, and obviously they'd show loads of mainstream stuff because it wasn't like an art house cinema or anything. But
Mm,
um, what they did do on a Sunday, they'd show these like horror double, not always horror, but they'd show these double bills. So you might have Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 or Exorcist and something else or something, I remember they did like an all-nighter, all the Star Trek films and all that kind of stuff. And that they were brilliant as well. But I remember definitely going to see I went to see every single Nightmare on Elm Street film, at the
mm,
cinema, sitting first time I saw those,
mm,
all of them was at the cinema, so
mm,
it it just, and again, can still smell the popcorn or the dodgy hot dogs or whatever. That those memories are just stuck there, and
mm,
unfortunately, that cinema, the building's still there, but it doesn't exist as a cinema anymore,
mm,
which is a real shame. But yeah, they were my memories, and just there's just something about that time, it was before pre-internet, all this kind of stuff, and it was you had to, you'd either have to see it at the cinema. You did have VHS, so you could retain
mm,
films if you wanted to, but there was still that feeling that it wasn't necessarily like it is now, where it's instant access straight
mm.
away, which is fine, for a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
things, but you end up retaining a special kind of relationship with a film if it's not as easy to access.
Mhm. I think it's because, like, if we talk about the late 80s, you used to get Fangoria, but you still had to
Mm,
wait 6 months before it came over here, a film like that. So there was proper anticipation, not like now where they have a teaser trailer or have a trailer for the trailer sort of thing going on. And you fed too much, where before you saw the images in Fangoria and the like, and you thought, yeah, that's 6 months' time. It's Nightmare on Elm Street 6 or whatever, and I want to see this, I want to see what happens next. Or it was Jason Takes Manhattan. You wanted to see it, for how bad it would be. And that need's not really there anymore to want to see. There's not event horror anymore like it used to be in the cinema. Yes, you can still get the big titles, but like the leeching off past glories, like the Exorcist Believer and things like that. And the anticipation's not there anymore.
It's a thing for me. I mean, I was like, when I was growing up, I was always into, being a teenager, certainly, I was massively into sort of metal stuff,
Mm,
but more than I liked a lot of metal stuff, but more than anything, I was into Alice Cooper, and that, you know. So again, when I was 16, Alice Cooper came back for his comeback tour,
mm,
Nightmare Returns. So I went to see Alice Cooper when I was 16. I was just 16, so I wasn't, only just 16. So I went to see Alice Cooper, And Alice Cooper meant everything. And obviously, there's a massive connection between Alice Cooper and
Mhm.
horror. I
Of
mean,
course, yeah.
the single that he came back with, "The Man Behind the Mask,"
Mhm.
was the soundtrack to Friday the 13th Part 6. And then
Mhm.
he'd end up starring in well, he was in Prince of Darkness, but he also starred in the later Nightmare on Elm Street film as well. So
Mhm.
there was always that connection for me as well, and obviously other metal bands as well, but obviously particularly Alice Cooper, this connection between
Mhm.
horror and rock and roll, and I was into comics as well. So it was all a kind of magic time for me. That's when I've retained a lot of that as an adult, everything. I'm still surrounded by all that same shit, but
Mhm.
yeah, just growing up, yeah, it was great that it was just that that coming together of me finally getting to see Alice Cooper in concert
Mhm.
after, looking, because you couldn't just go on the internet and download photos and videos. You had to, looking at all these tantalizing glimpses of what Alice Cooper was in the 70s, and obviously having
Mhm.
collecting I couldn't just download all the albums. I had to go out physically hunting for these kind of secondhand albums until I got the whole
Mhm.
collection. And then finally to get to see Alice Cooper, in the middle of the 80s, amongst all these horror films and all this kind of stuff. And they're standing there watching Alice Cooper, watching his stage show and all this kind of stuff. I don't think, in terms of going to even though arguably I've seen bands that might have been classed as being better musicians. I've never ever been as excited ever
Mhm.
about a concert as I
Mhm.
was then when I was seeing Alice Cooper when I was 16.
Mhm.
It's just it's
It
just
was a
just
great time for that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a pity that he's turned into a bit of a miserable old bugger recently, moaning about fucking trans people. It's like, fucking, what do you mean? Moaning about Alice Cooper,
Cooper.
moaning about trans people. Alice Cooper.
Mhm.
The fuck are you talking about, Alice?
Yeah, the irony's not lost, is it?
Oh, gee, you know what? I mean, I'm getting old now, but sometimes it's just like, some of these kind of more famous older men in this ebb, just shut the fuck up. Have your opinions, but just shut the fuck up.
Yeah. Just do what you do best
Yeah,
and just get
what
on with it.
difference does it make to you? What the fuck difference does it make to you?
That's why I love John Carpenter as he got older, because he's always been really miserable. And he just seems this grumpy old man, doesn't have any opinions on anything, takes the money, he's just enjoying life. He really is.
Talking to John Carpenter before we go into the film, have you seen it on BBC iPlayer at the minute? It's really fascinating. There's a 4-part documentary about
It's the Amityville one.
Amityville horror.
Yeah. That
It's
is really well done.
it's brilliant, isn't it? It's really good, and
Mm.
John Carpenter pops up being quite miserable.
Yeah. He's like granddad from Only Fools and Horses now, isn't he?
Yes.
He's like, oh, I tell boy.
It's
Yeah,
the
he's
I
bless him.
mean, I get it if you're getting older, but I mean, he's a lot older than I am, so I feel like I've got limited time, so I have to be selective. So I get it, but it's like
Yeah.
when they asked him if he'd seen, Amityville Part 2, and he's like, fuck that, I ain't got time for that shit.
Well, there's another franchise that's just been allowed to run away.
Oh, that's
I don't know.
mental. And when they're interviewing the lad and he was saying, "Oh, I think there's been 32 films," I thought he was exaggerating. It showed you more at
No,
the end. It's like, what the fuck?
it's absolutely great. I don't know whether someone's lost the license or the license has gone into like public domain. I just don't know. If you can license that sort of name, but it's just like nuts.
Yeah.
It's like some of them are just so cheap, they're awful. It's just why, but they're just living off a name, aren't they?
Any road. Right, let's I think it's time to go into the film we're going to look at today. So we are going to discuss the 1988 film Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, directed by James Signorelli.
Wanna talk tough movies? Here's a superhero with the biggest pair of all.
You looking for me?
There she was, just walking down the street singing. Do what
Miss Elvira is a slimy, slithering succubus, a concubine, a streetwalker, a tramp.
Yes, she's got it all.
So, James, when was the first time you saw this film?
It was one of the last films I bought as an X rental. So it would have probably been the year after the cinema release. And I managed to bag the poster as well, obviously. Being a 17, 18-year-old boy, you want that poster. And I got the video. I've still got the big plastic, like hard clamshell box. And I watched it. And I think that the strangest thing was watching it was it is a horror of sorts, but it's more of a carry-on film more than anything else. It's a bit like Carry On Screaming meets Footloose, because, you know, she's a stranger in a town, you know, and all the locals don't like her, but all the kids think she's cool, and it's just full of wonderful one-liners. And yes, it's camp, you know, it's an overused term, I know, but it's genuinely got heart. And I think that the Elvira character, all the way through from, I think it was 81 when she started, the character anyway, has always had heart. Yes, there's loads of boob gags and innuendo, but it's never mean-spirited. You know, it's never acidic. It's, you know, the comedy, and it's nice and gentle in it at times. You know, there's no nudity, there's no real gore in it. There's a monster at the end sort of thing. But it shows off her acting talents, her comic timing, which was by then obviously done, like the movie Macabre, which is again what was shown on NYX. And I don't know if that's ever been shown in the UK before. The movie Macabre series. I know it's to watch on Prime, but it's free to view. I just don't think that's done. And you can see through certain, because I've been able to scan through a lot of the episodes, how the character changes slightly and how she becomes fully formed. No pun intended. And it's just, she's always, you know, self-effacing. She's always, you know, jokes are on her a lot.
Yeah.
You know, the way she, you know, tries to fawn over people and stuff like that. I just think she's one of those fun people, and I would love to have her been able to move into more comedy, because I think Cassandra could have offered even more than Elvira to people. You know, even though for the Munsters film being the recent Rob Zombie one, being a complete car crash, she's actually very good in it. You know, and she shows how she can do comedy away from the character of Elvira itself.
I think it works. Well, I think the character works, Elvira. I mean, we'll get into the sort of influences later, but I think the character works. In particularly her performance, the way she molds that character is because, like you said, it's not coming from an arrogant point of view. You know, it is self-deprecating. You know, the humor is self-deprecating, and I think that Cassandra Peterson, she understands it's comedy. Yes, of course she's sexy, but it doesn't. She's not afraid to make herself look like a complete arse either. You know, at the same time, you know, that's the thing. It's like, not, you've got to go full in. You know, you can't just sit there smoldering. That's not particularly funny. You've got to do other things as well. You know, and it's the same. It's kind of same thing as, you know, if you look at Fenella Fielding in Carry On Screaming, it's just a brilliant performance. Of course, she's got the sexiest voice that's ever spoken by anybody. But she's also ridiculous as well. You know, she's not afraid to be ridiculous. You know, it's silly.
She's hamming it up, and she hams it up all the way through. And it turns out like there's the Porky's moment when the lads are trying to watch her. I think it's in the bath or in the shower, and she comes out and she's got the cold cream on her face. It's not the illusion, the sexy siren they wanted. And you know, that's just one, of course, is showing that she's almost normal. Like she's got a normal nighttime routine as women would have, sort of thing, or as would have thought of in the back of the 80s. And I think that sort of thing, it's like it's safe to view sexiness, if you know what I mean. You would be embarrassed in front of your mum and dad to watch it. And then I think I just think that sort of thing, and like jokes when she's talking about, because I know it's a piece in it that's she says something. Have you seen The Head with Two Things? Said the thing with two heads, and that's just gentle, very funny comedy, you know. Lovely slip there, and that's pure Carry On.
There's some really nice visual gags. There is one near the beginning where she's just done the TV show. She's come backstage, and she's standing behind the blind the
Mm,
dresser thing.
mm,
And she's got the fishnets hanging over the side, and she's got the underwear and the dress, and you thinking, well, she's going to change into something, her street clothes, and she comes out in exactly the same outfit. She's just replaced that outfit with
yeah.
an exactly the same outfit. I thought that was a really nice gag. Yeah, so it is, like you said, it's gentle. It's not. I think it's a weird. It is. There's no way this would be a mainstream film now. Uh,
No, no.
I, I- you know, I think this is what I was talking about earlier on with the 80s. It was a strange time. Yeah, there was some shit, but it's also
Mhm,
it was just a weird time. You could have that kind of weird mix. You could have, you kind of there's something about this film, even though people can watch it now and respond to it, there is something about this film that it could have only have come out of that period in the 80s. It's just the
mhm,
mix of horror and comedy and the R-rated sort of goofball Porky's type. I mean, it doesn't go over
mhm,
the top. It's not as tasteless as Porky's at
mhm.
all, but there is that there. And you suspect, I could be wrong, but you suspect that was a producer saying, yeah, we've got to have that scene in because we're appealing to 16-year-old spotty kids, boys, So I'd imagine that there was a bit of that, but it's not overly done. It's very tame in terms of that. If
Mhm.
you're expecting, some material, shall we say,
Yeah,
to
it's
keep
more
later, you're not really going to get it from this,
it is
because
more
it's
Benny
much
Hill
more.
than Lemon Popsicle, isn't it?
Yeah,
Sort of
of
thing.
course it is. And I never, I'm not just saying this now to make me sound cooler than I was. Obviously, I was a 16, 17-year-old kid. And obviously, you've got all those kind of urges that you have at that age. But I was never really, I honestly wasn't. Whereas a lot of other kids my age, that they were just desperate to see things like Porky's and Lemon. But I
Mhm,
was never that bothered.
mhm.
I was much more, I was much more into Boris Karloff.
But the thing is, though, sometimes less is more, and
Yeah,
with a figure's always on show, but that becomes secondary to watching Elvira act and the interaction, and she's a fully formed character, and it's a shame it didn't really break her into UK audiences. So I think that could have led to a lot more. And it was between that and Haunted Hills, which was shown on NYX this month, is actually a better constructed film, and
mm,
the gags are more there, and it's very much Mario Bava inspired, and Edgar Allan Poe inspired. But this one, again, a lot of the films at the time were like this. It was the underdog getting its day, that sort of thing. But I really would have loved her to have done more. Not necessarily as Elvira either. I think she really had. She should have got the talent to do that. But I think as horror fans, we got more from it because we could see the little references.
if you look at this and you look at the structure and you look at, like I said, it's a very 80s. I don't mean that in terms of fashions, but it's just something about there was like, and like I said, yeah, there were some rubbish that came out, but they were much more economical. It
Hmm.
wasn't. It was rare that you get. Now it seems like every film that comes out is 2 hours, 3 hours long.
Hmm.
Even something, a superhero film should not be fucking best part of 3 hours long. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And and everything was kind of more economical. This is like
Hmm.
just 90 minutes. And I think the structure, if you look at it, even though it's kind of an 80s thing, and it's got that 80s kind of veneer. It's nice. It's got those references. It's funny, all this kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But if you look at, that carries on into the 90s a little bit. If you look at this reminded me, obviously this came before, but if you look at the structure of something like Wayne's World, it
Hmm.
it's basically the same as something like Elvira or a lot of
Hmm.
other films from there. It's the same sort of thing, the kids up against the old person who
Hmm.
wants this from
Hmm.
them. It's kind of almost like that Scooby-Doo thing in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it still appeals like that. Yes, it's aged because of fashions, and some of the humor wouldn't be accepted now as such, especially in the like it would have been like a 12A probably rating or 12 rating here now. It's just fun. It's good harmless fun, and they say the horror references are a huge bonus for everybody. And it's everyone. I said about hamming it up and stuff like that, but everybody else around it plays it straight, which makes it funnier. She'll break the fourth wall now and again, but to me, I get more from that than I do most comedies these days.
There's some nice little supporting actors in this. The fact it's got a William Duell is in who I would first 10 minutes I was like, oh, where do I know him from? And then I realized, oh god, he's bloody Johnny, the shoeshine boy from Police Squad.
Yes.
Which is one of the hands down one of the best side characters in a sitcom ever.
Absolutely.
Just
absolutely.
What do you know about firefighting, Johnny?
I don't know anything. You have to give him. There's always something like baseball coach or something comes on. Oh, they're classics. I love those.
I've got the
series.
Police Squad series somewhere, and yeah, it's just. I remember watching that as a kid, and just I think my mum and dad were like, "What is this?" But I was just like, "This is brilliant. This is amazing."
But as a connection to that, and I know we'll go talk about more about horror comedy later on. One of the first horror comedies I saw in the cinema was a B movie that was shown with Airplane. And it was a black and white one called Cry Wolf, about a guy who got injected with a canine serum or something like that. And that was shown before Airplane in the good old days when you could have two, supporting feature and all that. And it was perfect for Airplane. It was all shot in black and white, done very, very much Universal Studios. And it was just, there was a spate of sausage robberies and stuff like that because he was turned into a dog, so, but that connection of humor, very, very similar. Cause I love the Airplane humor. It's just a shame that Scary Movie could have done the same. The original, and it didn't. It misfired, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, yeah, no, I'm not going to get into that. It's fucking
that's
awful,
another one. Yeah. But they say the humor is done right. It's tastefully. I don't think there's any bad language in it. To tell you the truth, I don't think there's anything there really.
No, there isn't.
It's just simple fun.
Here's a superhero with the biggest pair of all.
You looking for me?
Now then, it's can't really talk about Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, or Elvira, really, aka Cassandra Peterson, without really going back and thinking about that idea of the because it was largely an American thing, the horror host, because we did even though obviously as we mentioned earlier on, things like NYX kind of touches upon that and kind of fills that gap, and then in the early 90s we had things like obviously we had Movie Drone and stuff like that, but in terms of more specifically horror, even though we'd had the sort of double bills of the 70s and 80s, in the early 90s we had Dr. Terror.
That's right,
but we'd never really gone in for the horror host in this country. It's never really a thing, but obviously it's been well established thing in American culture, particularly in the 20th century for a number of years. And can't really talk about Elvira without talking about Vampira, aka Mila Nurmi. There's I mean, I don't know if you've read or how much you know about Vampira, but I don't know if you've read W. Scott Pool's book on Vampira.
No, I'm not. I know of her to an extent, but I've not read the book. No.
Oh yeah, I'd really recommend. I mean, in fact, I'd recommend pretty much any W. Scott Pool's books. He writes mainly about horror, but really he uses horror as a lens. And really, what he's writing about is he's offering very well researched critiques into American culture. And so he uses things as a lens to look at that. So he uses horror films, but so he did a book called Dark Carnival, where he's kind of like, it's almost like ripping apart the idea of the American dream and how And just looking at how America as empire, because we tend to think of empire, the British Empire from,
Yeah.
100 years ago, whatever, but
Hmm.
actually America has an empire now. They've got more troops in more countries of the world than any other nation. They have an
Yeah.
empire. So he looks at that, but uses horror films to describe how they are either reflecting or critiquing that. And it's really interesting, brilliant written. But the
Hmm.
Vampira book, he uses that really. Obviously, it's part biographical of Mila Nurmi, but it's also very much about how it's looking at how sexist the kind of country is.
Hmm.
And because
Hmm.
he talked, what's interesting about Vampira is that Mila Nurmi was way ahead of the game, not just in terms of
Hmm.
being a horror host, but just you're talking about the early 50s. She was offering this because she came up with this image.
Hmm.
And if you look at how after the post-war period, um wives or women were being sort of, even though they'd had this splash of independence during the Second World War when there was a lack of male workers, because
Hmm.
they'd been signed up or whatever, they they after the war they were being kind of pushed back into the kitchen and pushed back into this
Hmm.
domesticity, and that was the idea. If you look at a lot of 50s films, they are really ramming that down your throat. So
Hmm.
what Vampira did, or what Mila Nurmi did as Vampira, was offer this subverted, twisted, deformed version of the American
Hmm.
housewife with the sucked-in waist and the black clothes and the claws. She was
Hmm.
so subversive and this is why they got rid of her. She didn't last very long because they pushed her
No,
out.
I read it
And
was about only lasted about 8 months or something,
yeah,
didn't it?
yeah, and
Uh,
virtually nothing of it exists. You can hardly watch anything. There's nothing
mhm.
online or anything. There's
But the
few tiny
impact,
clips.
uh the impact of her, and that the way she's dressed and the smouldering, literally smouldering on screen. How that was allowed in the late 50s on American television, I don't know. But it's on the parts I have read about her, and the creation was slightly more Tisha Adams from the comic
Yes.
strips,
Yeah.
and she absolutely, I know, even for that short time, she became such an icon of America pop culture, and she's still, you will still see a reference every couple of days or whatever on the internet, or an image of her, or a drawing of her, or a tattoo of her. She's made such an impact continuously. Again, I think she just ended up being with Ed Wood, didn't she, in a couple of his films?
Yeah, she's Plan 9 from Outer Space. I mean, that is
Hmm.
kind of she became more or less the poster child for that, really. And
Hmm.
I think it's probably one of those things where people are kind of they may even own a t-shirt with Vampira on, but
Hmm.
aren't really aware of who she is and aren't really aware of the Vampira show or anything like that. But because she is such a horror icon, and she was.
Hmm.
Like I said, she was way ahead of her time. This is I mean, in the book, and again, this is in the 50s,
Hmm.
sort of mid to late 50s after Vampira, but she had some sort of accident. There was like she burned some of her hair off, so she
Right.
ended up shaving part of it, and literally she invented
Yes.
punk.
Yeah.
It's like fucking she not only was she this horror icon with this
Hmm.
shaved kind of haircut and the makeup, she literally
Hmm.
invented the punk look. You can see 20 years later, these kids were looking like that. She
Yeah.
was incredibly ahead of her time. And she was an artist as well. She wasn't just an
Hmm.
actor, and she was an artist. And I think she had her own shop where she sold stuff. And I think she ended up sounds really unlikely. I think she ended up laying tiles for a bit after Vampire. Imagine that. I mean, I don't think she worked at B&Q. I think they were like more artisan tiles. But yeah, she ended up
Yeah.
laying tiles for a bit after. Imagine that, a
Mhm.
vampire turning up to do your
Yeah.
kitchen.
Yeah. I'd let her. That's
Yeah.
for sure. I'd let her. But it was just, I think it was the eyebrows, the arches and the eyebrows, and the way she was permanently looking down on people, aloofness of the character and things like that, and I'm above you sort of thing, or you are my servant sort of thing. And I think that's where she hit the chord with probably mainly males. But again, she could have empowered females, showing like I'm in control of the situation. This is all about me. This series or these introductions, and you can see why she's just such this person who's so revered, but people don't know why she's revered. A lot of people just think she was in that Plan 9 and that was it. They would few knew about her show.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Yeah, if you've got any sort of vague interest in it, I cannot recommend that book enough. The W.
Mm,
Scott Poole book. It's just called Vampire. It's superb. It really is really good. The other thing that's kind of a little bit of a shame is how she. I mean, I could understand it from a professional point of view. I guess she would have felt a bit burned because she'd been sort of kicked out in the 50s, and then in the 80s along comes Cassandra Peterson,
mhm.
and there was this kind of court case of which Cassandra Peterson
Yeah.
actually won. But
Mhm,
I do think it's a shame because I don't think what she was doing. I think that you know, Mila Nurmi's Vampire was very much a reflection of what was happening in the 50s, and it was brave to do
mhm,
it then, and really
mhm,
subversive. And I think what
mhm,
Elvira did was something, obviously, it was easier to get away with that, but I think she was, it was still subversive in that, she took that idea of the Valley Girl and turned it on its head, and so it
mhm,
was kind of that. So I think it's a shame that the original Vampire couldn't see how much of an 80s version of that it was, and how it couldn't be what she was
mhm,
doing. It had to be something different,
mhm.
but it's a shame, really.
Was there any truth in the rumor that she tried to be resurrected, or they tried to resurrect her in the late 70s, early 80s? Like that sort of character or that sort of format.
I don't think I can't, and there may have been certain projects which come. I don't think anybody was lining her up to go on TV or anything anytime
Hmm.
soon. I don't
Hmm.
think being. I mean, as much as I love it, and as much as it is a cult thing now, I don't. Obviously, Plan 9 did not do her any favors whatsoever, or
Hmm.
just being
Yeah.
involved with Ed Wood at that time. It's all.
Hmm.
It's great for us to kind of look back and find it all
Yeah.
terribly amusing and getting a kick out of watching things like Plan 9, but you got to think if you were Mila Nurmi at that time,
Hmm.
there was nothing lower for you, and they weren't looking at that as being, oh, well, this is a cult thing, this is a camp thing. They
Hmm.
were just seeing this, well,
Hmm.
this is a cheap, shitty film I'm in. So, and I love it, but you've got to see
Hmm.
it from an actor at that point of view. Lugosi
Hmm.
wouldn't have been involved in that if he wasn't on the absolute bones of his arse.
Yeah. 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 That's true. It's sad, but God, what an impact you made. It still makes.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, in terms of Vampira and obviously Elvira, I mean, this is obviously it's much more, like you said, it's much more carry on screaming. It leans much more into the comedy horror, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that is like a nice kind of subgenre in itself. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
easy to get right. It really isn't. I don't think there's very few films that have got it right. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
it always works, and you know, it and again, I'm a bit of a contrarian, I guess. If you say comedy horror, a lot of people the first thing they'll say will be Shaun of the Dead, and the first time I saw Shaun of the Dead, it's got some genuinely funny moments in it. Don't get me wrong, and I don't think it's a
Mm-hmm.
bad film or anything, but I would go with Return of the Living Dead every time. I just think that works so well because
Mm-hmm.
not only is it kind of aping the zombie film, but it also comes up with so many new concepts that weren't happening in other zombie films at the time that it's brilliant. But it's
Mm-hmm.
funny as well. But the comedy is absolutely spot on. It's
Mm-hmm.
great. The zombies phoning for another ambulance or phoning for more cop cars. It's just fucking
Mm-hmm.
fantastic.
And you got to think of I think there's subgenres of comedy horror. There's like the straight comedy of something like, or the straight comedy with like Evil Dead 2 has so much comedy in it. Medieval Dead, third one has comedy in it. Then you've got the ones like Bloodbath at the House of Death, the Kenny Everett vehicle that
Yes.
died of death, and that's a spoof
Yeah.
comedy. But you know, and I think I sort of prefer like, it's difficult to say which one. Because I love Tucker and Dale versus Evil.
Yeah, it's
That's a
brilliant.
great comedy horror. That is a brilliant comedy horror. But then
We're
again,
having a
like I say,
doozy of a day, officer.
that so needs a sequel. It just, and I think like Shaun of the Dead was great till the last 20 minutes. I think it became too serious to be a comedy horror film at the end. You know what I mean? But then again, it was a scary movie. It was overdone. You know, the spoof that was just overdone.
The problem with Scary Movie, I think what it is, the problem with Scary Movie is that I don't have a sense, and I haven't seen them all by any stretch. I've seen a couple of them,
No.
and that was plenty. Um, the problem is that I don't get a sense that anybody involved with those films, producers, directors, writers, whatever, had any love for horror at all. And I think if they did, they would have worked a lot better. But you're not respecting the thing you're aping or the thing you're parodying. You've got to be able, if you watch Airplane, it's very clear that the makers of those films knew all the conventions of a disaster movie and got them brilliantly. And it has to come from a place of love. If you're coming at it with a sneer and a handful of gags, well, who cares? It's not that there's no respect, there's no heart, there's no love there. Even though I'm not a massive fan of Shaun of the Dead, the one thing they do get right is I've got absolutely no doubt that they have watched, Night of the Living Dead, Return of the Living Dead. They've watched all those films and understood them and understood what made them popular. That's why it works, because they are paying respect to that genre. They're not trying to undermine it or make it out as being tacky or terrible.
Yeah.
They're not doing that.
I think that's the misstep with Repossessed, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Leslie Nielsen it tried too hard to be, and there was no care in it, was there?
Yeah, and things like Dead and Loving It and stuff like that. It's not. It's just I think obviously for Leslie Nielsen, on the back of all those things, he's going to take the money. Here's some money, starring this shit. But yeah, it did kind of lessen the impact of those all the quality films that he was in earlier on, obviously Naked Gun and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting, really. I mean, I think it's a different discussion, but I think it's interesting to see what's happened to comedy in general on the cinema. I think comedy largely belongs on TV now. That's where you get the best comedy. Your comedy films, if anything, you tend to get like comedy dramas, so you've got comic elements, but there is essentially a
Is
drama.
that serious? Yeah.
Yeah, like I think it's interesting. I went to see Holdovers the other day. It's all right, but the trailer very much sells it as a comedy, but it's not really
Comedy, yeah.
It's I think so. I think what's interesting in terms of comedy horror is how it's sort of evolved into something else. I mean, it depends your view on sort of black comedy and how you view it, I guess. But something like Alice Lowe's Revenge, it is a tragic film on many levels, but it's piss funny as well in places, and it's not that's not easy to get right. The tone of that is not easy to get right. So, and something like Dog Soldiers, that's clearly there are moments of slapstick in that, but it's not intended to be an out and out comedy horror. So yeah, it's a strange one, I think. Again, like I think on television, Inside Number Nine, I mean, those guys, Reece Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton, they really the reason when they do like a horror type thing, the reason it works, even though it's got comedy elements, is because they know that stuff inside out. They know Amicus, they know Hammer, they know Blood on Satan's Claw. They know all this stuff. They love this stuff. They're not taking the piss out of it. They are just
Hmm.
simply using elements of that within a comedy, sort of horror, comedy suspense thing, whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
It has to come from
Hmm.
a place of love. If you're not, then if you don't, it's like there's a I can't even remember what it's called, but I was watching, I was bored and I was looking for something to watch on ITVX, and I came across a sitcom, and it was about a young guy who he's a doctor, and he gets bitten by a vampire, and it's supposed to be like a horror comedy, him learning how to be a vampire and all this. But the
Hmm.
character is like they they've basically written this character, all this character is he's dead into horror. He loves horror. So he
Hmm.
becomes a vampire and all, but it's like it's clear that the writer or the actor, nobody involved in this, understands what you're writing about.
Hmm.
All you've done is Googled it. Let's
Yeah.
drop a reference into Nosferatu. I've never seen it, don't understand what it is, but
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
drop a
Yeah.
reference in. And it's so thinly
Hmm.
veiled, it's shit. It's just like if you don't know this stuff, fucking leave it be, you know.
It's like I think it's what we do in the shadows is managed to encapsulate the love of horror, you know, because it does look like the film itself was brilliant. The series has continued that, and there was a love for the genre in it, and you can tell.
Yeah, that is yeah, that's a good example. I think, you know, I loved the film when it came out, and I it's weird actually because I started watching the series, and for some reason I kept getting interrupted. And it took me ages to get into it. I think it took me like 3 weeks to go back and fully watch the first episode. And
Hmm.
then I just left it on and I ended up watching the first series. And I got addicted to it after that. In fact, I've just blasted through the last series.
Yeah.
It's really good. I mean, you know, Matt Berry could do anything. I think he'd just be funny. You know, he basically is just toast, isn't he? Whatever he does,
Yeah.
he's just toast. You know, that's it. You know, the intonation of what he's talking about, that's just him.
Mm.
But it does work. And again, there is an understanding of those genres and those conventions of horror. It's not just
Hmm.
thrown on the screen for the sake of it. You
Hmm.
know, whoever's involved with this has you know, the idea of Colin being an energy vampire is just it's a fucking brilliant idea. That is, it's just
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. It's strange how horror comedy evolved for me. You look at the old Abbott and Costello movies and how they tried to bring back the Universal monsters. That they really worked at the time, you know. And they still had a short piece of horror element to them, but you could see how they paved the way for such things like Carry On Screaming, you know, which we talked about before, and it was is just almost perfect. You know, everything from the sets to the, you know, the script just so spot on for every horror cliche going for up to that moment. You know, and it's just that when I was looking at horror comedies before, and I was thinking there was more of them that were like more like creature feature comedies, like Tremors, which to me is just one of the best creature features ever made. I just love that film. I remember seeing it in the cinema, and there was only about 4 or 5 of us in it, and I think people are going to thought it was a serious horror film, and they seemed really disappointed. But I love that. I know that it's like died a death with the, I think it's 5 or 6, and there's a failed TV series. But it's just that one of those lightning in a bottle moments. That film, it was done
Yeah,
right. It was all practical effects. You know, it was just so good. You know, and I like that because again, it was done straight. You know, and but the comedy elements were great. There wasn't too much drama. There's a little bit of sadness in it, but it's predominantly comedy.
well, you know, I mean, just getting back to Carry On Screaming for a minute. I wrote an article about that. It's coming out fairly. I'm not going to say which magazine is because I don't think they've officially announced it yet. But yeah, I wrote an article about Carry On Screaming. It's coming out soon. Um, but yeah, the reason that works, yeah, it is a Carry On film, but
Mhm.
it's done with the same production values that a Hammer horror film.
Yeah.
It could have been a Hammer horror film. In fact, I think
Mhm.
I could be wrong on this, but I'm sure that the cinematographer also worked on Hammer films as well. There is some connection there, and I'm
Mhm.
sure there is, if I remember rightly. Um, but yeah, it really works. And I think that I think that Carry On Screaming, because what people with Carry On films, it's like there's a cut off point, I for the first um wedge of Carry On films,
Mm,
they were distributed by Anglo Amalgamated, and you can see where the cut-off point is because there is a distinct change in quality. I'm not saying
mm,
that some of the late 60s stuff and early 70s stuff wasn't entertaining and funny, but you can see there is much less money later on.
mm.
That you can see the money on the screen with things like, Carry On Jack or Carry On Cleo. And I think that Carry On Screaming was the last of those
Hmm.
Anglo amalgamated ones where you can see some of that money on screen because they
Yeah, and
look,
it's a good full stop.
yeah, you can see later on, stuff like Carry On at Your Convenience. It looks a lot cheaper, it's not,
Hmm.
there's not the same amount of care and
Everything's
the
present day to
production.
save on budget and stuff like that.
Yeah, and they start getting much more sort of less double entendres, more single entendres, isn't it? And, it's Carry On Emmanuel is a fucking piece of shit. He's garbage.
Yeah, yeah. See Kenneth Williams' Bottom, which is the
Oh,
last thing you want to see on screen, but you could see the embarrassment and everybody involved in that one, really.
yeah, yeah,
And Carry On Columbus was awful, wasn't it?
yeah. I think I've only seen that once years ago, and all I
Yeah,
remember is Jim Dale's wig. That's it. I think, or his perm, or whatever it was.
yeah. The thing is, it's like the resurrection of a hammer. There's always a story in the papers when it's a slow news day, every 5 or 6 months. Carry On films coming back, new casts. You get it. I think Carry On London was put about for
Yeah.
ages. Just before Babs died, and I just think, no, leave it. You can't recapture it.
Well,
You
what?
know,
How would you recapture it? Doing what
not in
exactly?
this day of age of
How
sensitivities
how
on some people.
how would you do Carry On now? It's just impossible. You're not going to do it
Mhm.
now.
No, you
And the
couldn't.
old ones are never going to go away. I could
Mhm.
go to fucking ITV three now, and I guarantee there's a Carry On film on somewhere.
Or on
They're
the
not going
buses.
away. They're there. You can watch the old ones. What the fuck is anybody going to do with a Carry On film? What the fuck would it be? Nothing. What would you? It wouldn't be a Carry On film,
No,
would it?
it
How?
wouldn't.
How would it be a Carry On film now? I don't mean this in a kind of Daily Mail or what you can't.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, I don't think you should do a Carry On film now because what's the fucking point?
yeah. See, do you feel like that about with the resurrection of Hammer again? And like the first time it came around, and they played the blinder with Woman in Black.
Mm.
It was good and it was gothic and it did feel like Hammer, and then just it petered away again. I didn't mind Let Me In. I thought it was a great remake. I thought that was really well done. The
I thought
Residents
Wakewood
sort of
was
hold
good. I thought Wakewood was excellent.
Wakewood's good, and again, that's more of a what's it called, like a folk horror, which
Yeah.
which Hammer slightly dabbled in. And I think if they maybe turned to a Dennis Wheatley book or something like that, we could have had a good run. But I don't know if I don't even just thrive on the name alone anymore these days.
It's just I think it's just people that watch GB News that are desperate for fucking a new Carry On film. It's like what I don't know what you're expecting, you
Mhm.
know.
I don't think it'd be as funny because you watched it because they were all playing the same character with a slightly different rude name.
But if you
And,
bring,
and
I just think if you bring Carry On films back now, if we sanction that, then it's only a matter of time before you get in fucking, Love Thy Neighbor and this is what this is what it leads to, and this is nothing
mm,
against the old Carry On films, but it's just this attitude now of you can't do anything these days. Yes, you fucking can.
mhm,
This like, as Stuart Lee points out, you've got so many comedians now that are just every fucking other day there's something on Twitter saying, oh, you can't say this and you can't say that. You've just been paid a fucking £1 million to do a fucking Netflix special. What are you talking about?
mm,
You are saying it. You can say it.
mhm,
But who the fuck would want a Carry On film now? What would be the point? There's
mhm,
no point. There's no what
mhm,
what is the new generation of Carry On? It's nothing. You can do other things with comedy. You can move it on. It doesn't have to be that.
mhm,
Let's
mhm,
not use an old franchise of films just so you can start reintroducing your outdated mode of fucking sexism or racism. just to please you because you can't fucking say anything anymore when you actually can.
So, what do you think of I know it's got a point, but with legacy movies, as they call them now, in television shows being prequels? Like we have that one that's maybe come from Peacock about for Friday the 13th and things like that.
I think
You
it
know,
can, there are obviously, there's stuff out there that works really well,
mhm.
who, obviously this isn't horror, but if you think about, who the hell would think that something like Karate Kid would work, with Cobra Kai?
Cobra
It's
Kai, yeah.
brilliant. I love it. It's so throwaway. It's fantastic. I love it.
Mm,
But but the character of Johnny in that is just amazing. Brilliant, brilliant performance. That first, because I teach film and stuff at university. One of the things I'll show them is that the first sort of bit of the episode of the first episode of from the first series of Cobra Kai, because it's so well done, it's so well structured, it's such a brilliant introduction to a character. But who saw that
mm,
coming?
mm, mm. So
Uh,
that's why I like the first series of Chucky. The second series was really going over the same old ground, but the first series of Chucky was really in your face, good horror, had a lot of things to say, but was done in such a way you didn't realize that's what they were saying initially, and that was great fun. But I think second and third series, I've got no holding up for the third series, but the second was very much felt like it was retreading.
well, again, I think like we're saying, it's got to come from a place of love, and for that, I mean, I've been reading today. I think that they're bringing back. Well, they're looking to bring back Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I have no idea what they're going to do with that. I don't think Sarah Michelle Gellar is going to be involved because I don't, as she
Mm,
points out, it's about that. When I did it, it was a show about, it was a metaphor for adolescence. I'm not an
mm,
adolescent anymore, so why would I be involved in it? So, in some ways, I hope they do bring it back and they do something decent with it. But if they don't,
mm,
the old one's not disappeared. I can watch it whenever I want. I've got the
mm,
box set.
mm,
Um, but I think that recently, a lot sometimes what you tend to do is this idea of, it's almost that bait and switch idea of putting something out there to try and attract the original fans and then doing nothing to with the actual property, or completely changing the actual property.
So it's not
So
what it was.
yeah, which is fine, but
Mm,
don't. It's like the whole thing, the Scooby-Doo thing they did, the Velma thing, whatever they did.
mm,
You Yeah, of course you can change the race of characters and all that. That's fine. That's just diverse casting. We're in the 21st century, but it's you can't completely change the characters to make them not
mm.
the characters, and then you don't have the dog in, and you don't have people expect that. It's like
Yeah,
having Superman without a cape. That's not going to work.
yeah, that's true. But it's they keep going back and they give this horrible term legacy. Oh yeah, legacy characters and things like that. They're only brought in like in Scream to be killed off.
Yeah,
And like Dewey in Scream 5 possibly. And then that's a sad bit. We should be creating new stuff. Instead of keep looking back, we need new things, new things. They don't need you to diverse change anything. Let's just have new exciting characters with a diverse cast. You know what I mean? Like new things instead of relying on changing old stuff. That I just think that's a better way forward than trying to go look back and then, oh yeah, but we'll change this and this. Just create something new.
yeah, because
I think.
they largely end up being the things that if you want to reduce it to those terms, those new things largely end up making money. The things
Mhm,
that people aren't expecting. It's
mhm,
these, the hit TV shows tend to come out of nowhere, and
mhm.
they end up being popular through word of mouth, not because you've dug up some old fucking franchise and shoveled it
Yeah,
out there with no
yeah,
love or interest in it, really. You just want the name and the brand.
yeah.
There's no
And that's
love.
where the
People can see through that.
mhm. And that's where the lack of care comes in, isn't it? And like you said, they want the brand name, they want to change it into something else. But
Yeah.
just try and change, just try and invent something new or original. and
I
that's
think
where
that,
things will work.
there's a middle, well, not a middle ground, but there is a way of doing it. If you look at something like, okay, not talking about TV so much, but if you
Hmm.
look at, say, the reimagining or redoing of, or remaking, if you like, of Suspiria,
Yeah,
I think that was a really good,
yeah,
that was how you do it, So
yeah.
obviously you've got Suspiria, the name, so you could say, well, that's a bit cynical, but what they retained, they did something completely new with it, retained the essence,
Yeah.
but they didn't try and make a Dario Argento film.
Hmm.
They tried to make a 21st century film.
Hmm.
And I think what was brilliant about it is that as much as I love as much as I love the Dario Argento original,
Yeah.
you know, we've got a horror film set in a dance studio. You never see any dancing, And I think that's what
Yeah.
they went
Yeah.
back to in the remake, and they actually put dance at the center of it.
Hmm. Yeah. 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 That's a good point. I think I'll revisit that because I love the score to the new one. I think Tom York did it. I think for Radiohead did the score for it. But yeah, you've got a point with that one, and as long as they're doing something new, not changing too much, but adding something that's new. You say it's all about essence, and it's again you come back to it. It's the heart of it, and that's where horror comedies need a decent heart on it, and they need not to um what like water down the horror to the extent that it's like cocking a snoot at them. It's not. It's been really derogatory to the horror genre and to its fans.
If you can do something interesting with it, then yeah, revisit Friday the 13th or
Hmm.
Halloween. But that you
Hmm.
should, before doing that. I mean, obviously they're not, because it's a money making venture. But
Hmm.
if you can do something original and smart and weird or strange with it, that doesn't try and do a crap version of Carpenter, but actually presents you with something slightly different and
Hmm.
presents a 21st century version of that, then do that.
Hmm.
Otherwise, why bother? When you've got, films like Get Out, or you've got films like Revenge by Alice Lowe that or you've got films like Poor Things recently, or you've got,
Hmm.
Scent Maud or whatever, which are genuinely doing some innovative, strange, on usually, not so much Poor Things, but with the other,
Hmm.
usually on very low budgets. And they're
Hmm.
not overly done with CG or whatever. They are
Hmm.
presenting us with, dare I say it, ideas, rather than names or brands.
Hmm.
Uh,
Exactly.
do that.
Hmm. So do you think?
Do
Do you
that,
think
filmmakers.
just it's easy because we've said it's easy, so you just go and do it? Yeah, surely.
Come on, I've
Should,
got some more clouds to shout at.
but yeah, I think, and again, horror comedies again, it's preference, isn't it? Because all horror comedies subjective and things like that. It's where what was it? Fearless? No, was it the lesbian vampire killers or vampire lesbian killers or the
Yeah.
James Corden film from years ago? And
Yeah,
that
well,
died because
that
it
should
was
tell you everything
sneering
you
at the
need to know. A
yeah.
James Corden film.
It was that was a sneery film. It was like against horror fans and stuff like that. I thought, if you know what I mean, that's
Mm.
like even God, Bruce Campbell, bless him. He's done some terrible comedy horror films. So it doesn't matter. If we've got the cast or not.
I think
It's all
Bruce
down to the
Campbell would
script.
would probably be the first one to admit terrible as well.
That's probably true. But what's your number one comedy horror?
I think I think Return of the Living Dead. I think
Mm,
it's just great. It's
it
just
is.
it's got laugh out loud stuff, but also the way that they handle the zombies is brilliant. It's
Mhm,
genuinely innovative.
mhm. Yeah, I'd love to say that in a crowd again.
Mm.
I think I saw it at an all nighter once, and it was just brilliant. Even if it was 2:30 in the morning, everyone was just loving it. Whether they knew it or not.
Well, I think it's the 40th anniversary next year, isn't it? So
Right. Yeah, we'll definitely have to get that shown somewhere on the
yeah.
big screen. Make an event of that one.
Anyway, I think we've canned Elvira and subsequent topics to death. It just remains. I'm not going to do my fucking Facebook plugs. You know where we are. Follow us. Do this. Blah blah. Fucking blah. Do that. Give us a review, which you won't, you bastards. You fucking ignoring my request for a review. I'm sorry. If you have written us a review, then you're fantastic. Anyway, yeah. Thank you. Just remains for me to say thank you once again to James Whittington for coming on. Cheers, James.
Great, mate. Anytime, mate. Hope to see you soon.
And remember to call round next time. Make yourself at home. You look like you're dying for a nice cup of tea for terror.
And remember, my friend, future events such as these will affect you in the future.